Hi, Radhika. It's really great to have you on the show.
Hi, Sabine. It's great to see you again.
Can you tell us a little bit about your life trajectory? How did you go about becoming a roboticist?
You had me thinking a lot about that. I think many of us got into robotics in different ways. When I was a grad student, I was actually afraid of robotics because, first of all, the robots were really clunky and they were super, super expensive. And so actually, I only did theory work. And I really got into robotics when I was a faculty member. So it's kind of late in my career. But one of the fun things that happened to me was I knew another grad student from MIT, James McLurkin, and he had this lovely, lovely swarm. I know in swarm robotics, we all remember that iRobot swarm. And he came to my class, and it was just this amazing thing. So James is one of the few African-American roboticists that I know. Um, and and he came with this suitcase and he opened the suitcase and he took out 50 robots, and my whole class just fell in love with robotics. And I thought, oh, we must do something like this. So I think, he really inspired me to move in this direction. And I think really also the world of robotics was changing. So it was becoming possible to buy robots. I bought Kepras and I bought epochs, and all of the work that people did to make open source robotics was really, really how I got started. And now I'm excited that my lab actually has robots like the kilobots that other people buy. I feel like that came a full circle. But when I started as a faculty member, I didn't think that I would do robotics. In fact, the dean asked me and said, Radhika, do you need a lab to do experiments? And I told him, no, absolutely not. I will never need a lab because I will never own any hardware. That was 2004. And now it's, 2020 and we have thousands of robots in the labs. So yeah, I think I've come to robotics a little late, but I love it. And I also think that you can come to it anytime. It really is such a field that so many different disciplines can take part, and you can learn it at any age.
That's amazing because I used to go to your lab every week when I was in Boston to get a robotics fix because at that time I wasn't doing robotics, and I hadn't realized that you'd gone from theory to being in this lab, which is the way I perceived it, had robots everywhere. Like everyone was building robot systems. So it's really
Right.
impressive actually the trajectory from the theory to the real robots. What are some of your proudest robotics moments?
Well, I have many. I think one of my proudest moments really has to do with the kilobot swarm. I think, I had already bought so many different swarm robots, and at about 10 or 20 robots, it would just be so hard to manage a group of robots. And it was so hard to achieve the kind of scale that I wanted to. And thanks to, several people in the lab, like you said, the time that you visited my lab was the peak of robotic design in my lab. So Mike Rubenstein was designing the kilobots, Kirsten was designing the Termes robots, Niels Knapp was designing collective construction robots. There were all these robots in the lab. And having, for the first time, 1,000 robots moving around was just an incredible thing. And we had the director of DARPA come and visit us, and she was just fascinated. To her, it was like this amazing physics of particles, and just watching her react. And actually, maybe the proudest moment was when James McLurkin, who I mentioned, who had designed the swarm that inspired me, he visited our lab, and Mike and I got to show him the robots. And he just started laughing, and he was like, "This is so beautiful." And both of us were just like, oh, we have achieved a great reward today. We've really impressed the person who inspired us on this path. So yeah, I think that was one really proud moment for me. But I've had other ones too. We've had lots of cases where robots have failed and people have worked really hard to still make a demo go through. And I can think of many examples like that where at the last minute things worked and you just felt like everyone connected and was able to make it through some adversity. I think those also feel like proud moments. They're a little harder to describe, but they certainly bring the lab together.
And there's such a legacy in these kilobots and these other robotic systems, both because kilobots are everywhere. In our lab, we've, based on your designs, we've built 1,000, but others have purchased kilobots. So there's thousands and thousands. We thought we should bring them all together and make a mega swarm at some point. But also,
oh my God,
yeah, those
that would be amazing.
a lot of them became faculty as well. So there's like this legacy
right.
of people who you train, kind of beyond the robots that they produce. So you mentioned some of these challenges. What are some of the challenges that you faced along the way? Like, what do you do when things don't work?
I think, especially, I think a lot of people felt that robotics was really risky in a way, that there are just a lot of engineering challenges you don't anticipate. But I think what I realized is theory also has challenges. No matter what you pick, you're venturing into the unknown and you're trading off one unknown for another. So I have found that when I'm facing challenges with robotics, I have a tendency to try and look for theory projects where I can make progress. And then when I'm having challenges with theory, I start to think of robots that we could build. Maybe it's just a survival technique to try and have these multiple things in your life so that you can pit one against another. But I don't know. I think challenges are pretty much all the time. So one of my lab members, really amazing person, Alex Cornejo, who of course helped also with the kilobots and designed the whole programming environment for them. Alex always said that whatever you do, it's 98% work and 2% reward, where reward might be positive or negative. So the point where your project comes together and either fails totally or totally succeeds or whatever that is, it's such a small amount of the time that you put into a research project. So it's the 98% of the time you have to enjoy. And then both the good and the bad, you kind of have to take with a little bit of even keel. I still think he's the only person in our lab who achieved that. The rest of us just sort of looked at him and it's like, no, I want to be completely up in the air when things work and completely down in the dumps when they don't. But he was right that 98% of the time, you're really always in ups and downs. And so I find that even just understanding that makes it easier to accept. If you know that today, for the next 3 months you're stuck, but you saw that somebody else was stuck and got out of it, then you kind of just have to believe that it'll happen. We invariably learn a lot in those moments when you're stuck or when things are not working. Maybe you learn that you need to change directions. Maybe you learn that something is harder than it was before. So those are really sometimes the key discovery moments, but they are, I won't lie, I mean, I still find them hard. It doesn't matter how old I get. So I've accepted that, like, there are things that about my personality that will never change. So I just sort of grump through that, but because I believe that, things will emerge from it, I think it's an acceptable thing. It's acceptable.
Yeah, it's a good way of thinking about it, because I'll tell my students, you'll work, it's a bit hard, but you'll be so happy when it works. But actually, you're right. We should think about the moment, like that work that goes into it, and learn to enjoy that bit of the journey as well. What does a day in your life look like? What is a typical day for Radhika, and how has it changed over time? As you've learned
over the years. Yeah, but also like you change in life. So, now, as people may or may not know, both of my kids are older. My son's in his senior year of high school. My daughter is in college. It is very hard for me to circle back and remember what I felt like when she was a toddler. It almost seems like that was a different person and this is a different person. But one of the things that's kind of fun that I did is at different points in my life, I've made self-portraits. I like to paint.
Oh, I'd love to see them. We should show one of them. Do you want to walk us through one of these paintings?
Yeah, actually, let me show you this one. I made a lot of different self-portraits, but this particular self-portrait I made around 2008 when I was about 4 years into my faculty life. And to be honest, I think at that moment I was having one of those really frazzled months. And I just wanted to sit back and I was like, what is it that I want to be? And like, what is my life? And many times I make paintings that are inspired by other painters I like. And so this painting is actually inspired by the Mughal miniature paintings, where you sort of describe a story as a house. And so different rooms represent different parts of the story. So in this painting, you actually see kind of a day in my life. So in the 4 rooms that you can sort of obviously see, there's my room of science, there's my room of teaching, there's my room of me and Quentin doing so much paperwork and so much feeding. It was like the 24/7 kitchen paperwork household. And then you see my kids and the massive toys and our attempt to teach them music and on all of this. And I think one of the things I realized, and it's still true for me now, is that for me, I like to have chunks of time. So I compartmentalize my life. Actually, I think a lot of women do this, is that it is really hard to live all these different lives in a society that doesn't reward you or doesn't recognize and certainly does not appreciate that we have to. I wanted to be good at all of those things. I wanted to be a good parent and to be a good scientist and to be a good teacher. And somehow in every sphere, you were told, you have to do only this. You have to be a full-time mother, or you have to be a full-time, worker bee, and I found that really, really oppressive. And I think this painting was, for me, a way to deal with it, to sort of put down my sort of happy, chaotic, crazy life. And I realize now that lots of people have this life.
And we recognize those blocks. We recognize those blocks. That I feel,
right?
I feel the same. I think that's, yeah. And you do so well at all of these things.
Right. And so I think that, like, if you look closely at the painting, I think you can see that element of struggle too, is that, I was walking through my life, looking at it, these rooms, and I felt like these compartments were constantly leaking into each other. Constantly, child would get sick and you had to go home, or work would end up somewhere. And sometimes I just wanted it all to stop and just go sit in front of a window and blank my mind. And that was the top ultimate room.
Bliss. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I felt really depressed, and that you can kind of see at the bottom. There's a locked room with my old hobbies, and actually one of the old hobbies was painting. So I was literally trying to break open that room by painting this painting. But I think for me, I do have self-portraits of different moments in my life, and they do capture, I think, sort of both what you want to be and maybe what you struggle with also. And I realized that in if every 5 years, or maybe every 8 years I've made a portrait, now maybe every 5 years, they look really different, but they always are somewhat chaotic, and they always include many, many things. I think having a life that is full is so important and so undervalued in our society. I want to be a good citizen. I don't want it, even more. Then I wanted to be a good parent and a good scientist. Right now, I want to be a good citizen. And being a good citizen is hard work in a culture that is struggling with so much sexism and so much racism. So if I was going to draw this portrait again, I think there would be a big block. As maybe but maybe a lot of people don't know, my husband was also an MIT alum, a computer scientist. At some point, he stopped working on startups and stuff and moved into the nonprofit sector and climate justice. And now he's an elected official. So he full-time works on civic engagement, working on climate justice and race justice primarily. And he's from the Caribbean. And so, our family, that has become a really big piece of our life. And I love robotics. And I love what it can do for the world. And I don't love what are the bad things that it can inherit from the world. So I want to be part of all of that. And I think you know, when I look at, if you ask me like today, what happened in a day in my life, I did some work on diversity initiatives and I read some papers for ICRA and IROS, and you know, we got a rejection and we got an acceptance, and you know, it's a day, like a normal day of like all of these pieces fitting in, and my parents called me because, you know, COVID is so complicated for them and so on. And so one day, to be honest, fits all of these pieces in it. And I think that's fine. You know, I think that's probably, I hope, what other people's life looks like too, with all of these pieces intertwined. But
I think that
yeah.
sounds amazing, actually. I think that's something to live up to. This notion of these compartments leaking, that's one of the myths. Is it's hard to really compartmentalize all of this. Are there other myths that you've been thinking about?
Yeah, I have this dream on the stack of things to write a blog article about different myths. In 2013, when I had just gotten tenure, I wrote a blog article about, you know, my feeling about misperceptions about the tenure track, or just a different way of looking at the tenure track without tenure, and thinking about, you know, what were the important things in life. And I think what really shocked me with that blog is I really thought nobody would read it. And so when so many people read it and so many people connected with me, I felt that there was much more that we were failing to say as a society. So I think, you know, one of the myths might be honesty. You know, we talk about being honesty and we talk about being truthful, but I find that computer science is not we aren't the most honest or truthful or meritocratic, and our inability to be honest actually makes a lot of these other myths a lot harder to break. We're so dedicated to them that we're unable to look at the data. And this one just occurred to me now. Some of the other myths that I've talked about with people are like the myth of genius, believing that individual people are, first of all, born and destined to be to break through in the field. This has been a really, really problematic issue, calling this belief in sort of innate brilliance or innate genius. And there's a lot of work in the field of psychology and sociology showing the detriments of it. And I think there's a lot of amazing research on collective intelligence, which for me is very, of course, I work on collective robotics and I draw from collective intelligence of ants. But if you look at the work on collective intelligence of humans, groups can be amazingly powerful compared to an individual. And in fact, one of these really amazing studies showed that if you take a group and you look at group performance is actually not well predicted from the IQ of individuals. In fact, it's better predicted from the EQ, or the emotional intelligence of individuals, as well as conversation and dynamics. And so clearly as we work in groups in science, I think we should be paying more attention to all of the research that tells us about how to create really vibrant collectives, rather than always trying to put people down and pick one or two people as the genius. Because not only does that not be honest about the role of the team, but I think it also encourages bad behavior. Too often somebody's labeled a genius, which just means that they can do what they want, and we're unable to stop them because somehow their absence would cause scientific community to fall apart. And it's like, no, it wouldn't actually. The scientific community has never been dependent on individual geniuses. It's really a collective endeavor. I think for me, that's one of the biggest myths. We're really stuck with glorifying individuals and not understanding enough how much we function as a team and how important it is to glorify team values in some way rather than glorifying individuals. I think that's one of the myths that we could all use some help with. It just because it's so baked in, it's really hard to extract.
Those are great things to be aware of. And the 7-year postdoc blog was really something that's, you know, being a young early career person going into academia and setting up a career as a faculty, you needed to read that, I think, to kind of make the jump and to feel confident that you could go and start a family and do your research and enjoy the ride. I think part of it was about enjoying the
Yeah.
ride. And so those are really impactful, I think. What would you tell your younger self or young people starting out now, maybe just a word of advice for them?
I mean, I try not to tell my younger self things. And my younger self just didn't know stuff, and I don't know if knowing it would have helped. But I think the one thing I would say is when I was younger, it was harder to believe in myself. And as a woman, that gets doubly harder because society is constantly telling you not to believe in yourself. That's very unfair. And my Black women friends, of course, get, quadruple that, of being, told that they don't belong, that they don't deserve, that they don't trust, that they shouldn't trust themselves. And I think that some of that is natural. We're young and we haven't yet tested all of those things, and we don't know who we are yet. And that is okay. That's not a fault. that's a reality. You're young. Of course you don't know what you're capable of. Of course you don't know what your work's going to be. And you can't control everything, right? So some of it is like the words you said were so perfect. Enjoy the ride. There is something so lovely about being young, about having all these possibilities open. If we treat it as a fault, that is such an oppressive way of viewing it. And I think for women, that double oppression is very, very painful. And I think that my tack in life has often been to put blinders and sort of ignore people's telling me what is and is not right and trying to go with my gut. That worked for me. Other people have different techniques. I wouldn't say that I have learned some great technique that other people don't have. But I think just finding that belief in your own gut and the feeling that being young and not knowing what you're capable of is a wonderful thing, not a terrible thing. I think as you get older, it's a different story. I still hate rejections. I still feel unsure of what I can be, but I can look back and say, okay, so next year I turn 50, which I'm slightly freaked out about. But that's a lot of years to integrate over. I have a lot of data, right? So even when I feel super unhappy or worried or something, I have my past self to integrate over and go, okay, well, the data suggests that I shouldn't really expect some ridiculous, it could still happen, but, generally it's kind of going to go the same. And that's nice, but it also a lot of possibilities no longer exists. So there are things I know about myself or things I know about society that I can't undo. And so there is actually a loss to not having all those possibilities and all of that optimism that I had when I was young. So I think just taking each age for what it is would be, I think what I would pass on, that the young are waiting to be old, and then the old are wishing they were young, and clearly we're missing the moment in every possible way, right? So all of those moments, being a grad student has ups and downs, being a young parent, young faculty has ups and downs, being a senior faculty has ups and downs. Great. So enjoy every one of them. There's certainly a lot of ups. That should be good enough. So I think if there was one thing I would pass on, that would be it. That it's okay to be uncertain, and the possibilities are actually also a wonderful thing. That's the wonderful adventure that's ahead of you.
Oh, good. Final word on the science now. What do you see as the next frontier for you in the research world?
I've become more and more fascinated with biology. When you had come to my lab, I think we were just starting at the point where we had gone to Namibia to see termites, and it was really the beginning where I got to work with biologists directly. I think the more field trips and stuff I've done, the more excited I am about bio-inspired robotics and really just trying to get closer to what nature can achieve. And I don't know if that's a great frontier for everybody. It certainly is slightly science driven more than application driven, is really like fundamentally AI and how AI is embodied. But in that realm, I'm really excited about underwater robots. I'm excited about thinking about, if you look at the kilowatt swarm as thousands of robots together, but then I went to the Cape and it's like these tiny little minnows and there's thousands of them, and you walk and they move and they turn, and it's just this beautiful three-dimensional underwater swarm. And could we do something like that? Could we create robots that in 3 dimensions could do this in the beautiful way that fish schools do? And I don't know if it's an important thing to work on, but I think it is another way to understand the biology, to understand what it takes to actually evolve or replicate that kind of behavior. So that's something that I am personally excited about.
Yeah, I'd be too. That sounds amazing. Thanks so much, Radhika, for being on the show today.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Sabine.